Grace stood in the middle of the courtroom, feeling the weight of 30 pairs of eyes watching her every move. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The silence in the room was heavy and uncomfortable, like the moment before a thunderstorm. For a few seconds, Grace considered simply apologizing and sitting back down. That would be the easy thing to do. Most people in her situation would probably just say sorry and hope the judge would move on to someone else. But something deep inside Grace told her that this moment was about more than just her embarrassment. Grace thought about all the nurses she worked with at Manchester General Hospital. She thought about her friend Betty, who had been a nurse for 30 years and still worked double shifts to help patients. She thought about young Tom, who had just graduated from nursing school and was so excited to start helping people. She thought about all the doctors, orderlies, and hospital staff who worked so hard every day to save lives. Grace realized that if she stayed quiet now, she would not just be letting herself down. She would be letting down everyone who worked in healthcare, everyone who wore scrubs to work, everyone who put helping others before looking perfect. Grace took a deep breath and felt her courage grow stronger. She looked directly at Judge Thompson and spoke in a clear, respectful voice. "Your Honor," Grace said, her voice steady despite her nervousness, "may I please explain why I am dressed this way?" Judge Thompson's eyebrows went up in surprise. In his 25 years as a judge, most people who were corrected in his courtroom just apologized quickly and quietly. They usually looked down at their feet and mumbled an apology. Very few people ever asked permission to explain themselves. The judge studied Grace's face for a moment. He could see that she was not being disrespectful or argumentative. There was something sincere and honest in her expression. He was curious about what she might say. "Very well," Judge Thompson said, his voice still stern but slightly less angry. "But make it quick. We have important business to attend to." Grace felt a small wave of relief. At least he was giving her a chance to speak. She organized her thoughts quickly, knowing she had to choose her words carefully. "I apologize if my appearance seems inappropriate, Your Honor," Grace began, her voice becoming stronger and more confident with each word. "I came directly from a 16-hour shift at Manchester General Hospital. I did not have time to go home and change clothes because I did not want to be late for this important court proceeding." The people in the courtroom were listening more carefully now. Some of them were leaning forward in their seats, interested in what Grace had to say. The hostile atmosphere was beginning to change into something more like curiosity. Grace continued, her voice warm and sincere. "Last night was a very busy night at the hospital. I helped deliver a healthy baby boy to a young mother who had been trying to have children for many years. When I placed that baby in her arms, I saw pure joy on her face. It was one of the most beautiful moments I have ever experienced." Several people in the courtroom were nodding slightly. A few of the women had soft smiles on their faces, remembering their own experiences with childbirth or thinking about their own children. "I also cared for an elderly gentleman with pneumonia who was scared and alone," Grace said. "His family lives far away, and he was frightened about his illness. I sat with him for hours, holding his hand and talking to him until he felt safe enough to sleep." Judge Thompson was listening more carefully now. His expression was no longer angry. Instead, he looked thoughtful and curious. "And I helped save a woman who was badly injured in a car accident," Grace continued. "She was brought to the hospital in critical condition. I worked alongside doctors and other nurses for hours to stabilize her condition. By the time my shift ended, she was stable and will make a full recovery." The courtroom was completely silent now, but it was a different kind of silence. It was not the uncomfortable silence of embarrassment. It was the respectful silence of people who were truly listening to something important. Grace looked round the room and saw that people's faces had changed. They were no longer judging her or whispering about her appearance. They were listening to her story with respect and interest. "I received my jury duty notice weeks ago," Grace said, her voice growing stronger. "I believe that serving on a jury is my civic duty, just as caring for patients is my calling. When I realized I had to choose between being late for a court or coming in my work uniform, I choose to be here on time because I respect this court and the justice system." Judge Thompson was studying Grace's face intently now, his anger completely replaced by genuine interest. Grace felt the energy in the courtroom shifting as she continued to speak. The hostile atmosphere that had filled the room just minutes earlier was slowly melting away, replaced by something warmer and more understanding. She could see it in people's faces. Their expressions were softening, their posture was relaxing, and some were even nodding in agreement. "Your Honor," Grace said, her voice becoming stronger and more confident with each word, "I understand that appearance matters in a courtroom. I know that this is a place of great importance, where serious decisions are made that affect people's lives. But I hope you can understand that I came here straight from saving lives because I believe deeply in doing my duty." Grace turned slightly to look at the other potential jurors sitting in the wooden benches round her. She saw a businessman in an expensive suit, a teacher in a neat dress, a retired man in a pressed shirt, and a young mother in professional clothes. All of them were watching her intently, their earlier judgment replaced by genuine interest. "In my 12 years as a nurse," Grace continued, her voice clear and sincere, "I have learned that true respect comes not from what we wear on the outside, but from what we do with our lives. I have held the hands of people who were dying, staying with them so they would not be alone in their final moments. I have celebrated with new parents when their babies took their first breath. I have comforted children who were scared and confused about why they were in the hospital." Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman sitting in the front row, felt tears forming in her eyes. She remembered her own stay in the hospital 2 years ago, when a kind nurse had stayed with her through a frightening night. That nurse had worn scrubs, just like Grace's, and Mrs. Patterson had never felt more grateful for anyone in her life. Grace's voice became softer but somehow more powerful at the same time. "I work night shifts when most people are sleeping safely in their beds. I work double shifts when the hospital is short-staffed. I work overtime during flu season, during emergencies, during holidays when I could be home with my family, my colleagues, and I are often tired. Our feet hurt, our backs ache. But we never give up because we know that people's lives depend on us." Judge Thompson was looking at Grace with completely different eyes now. His stern, angry expression had vanished entirely. Instead, he was studying her face with something that looked like respect and maybe even admiration. He was beginning to understand that he had made a serious mistake in judging this woman so quickly. The judge thought about his own daughter, who was a teacher, and how proud he was of her dedication to helping children learn. He thought about his brother, who was a firefighter, and how the whole family respected his commitment to saving lives. Looking at Grace now, he realized that her work was just as important, just as noble, and just as deserving of respect. "These scrubs have been with me through some of the most important moments of my life," Grace said, looking down at her blue uniform with obvious pride. "They were there when I saved my first patient, a little girl who had stopped breathing. I will never forget the moment when she opened her eyes and smiled at me. They were there when I worked through the worst flu season our hospital had ever seen, when we were so busy that some of us worked for days with only a few hours of sleep." Grace paused and looked directly at Judge Thompson. "These scrubs represent my dedication to serving others. They are not just clothes to me. They are a symbol of my commitment to helping people when they need it most. The courtroom was completely silent now, but it was a respectful silence. People were not whispering or shaking their heads anymore. Instead, they were listening to every word Grace said, and many of them were beginning to feel ashamed of their earlier judgment. Johnson, a businessman who had been one of the people shaking his head disapprovingly earlier, now felt embarrassed about his reaction. He realized that Grace's scrubs represented something far more important than any expensive suit. They represented selfless service to others. Grace took a deep breath and prepared to finish her explanation. Your Honor, and members of this court, I want you to know that I have the utmost respect for this courtroom and for the justice system. If my appearance dishonors this court in any way, I will respectfully leave right now and return to the hospital where I am needed. Grace stood perfectly still, her head held high, waiting for Judge Thompson's response. The entire courtroom waited with her, the silence heavy with anticipation and newfound respect for the brave nurse who had defended not just herself, but all the hard-working people who serve others every day. The courtroom remained completely silent as Grace finished speaking. Everyone was waiting to see what Judge Thompson would do next. The tension in the air was thick, like the moment before an important announcement that would change everything. Judge Thompson sat quietly behind his large wooden desk for what felt like a very long time. He was thinking deeply about what Grace had just said. Her words had touched something inside him that he had not felt in years. As a judge, he was used to making quick decisions based on facts and evidence. But today, he realized he had made a judgment based on appearances alone. Slowly, Judge Thompson stood up from his chair. The entire courtroom watched him carefully, wondering what he would say. His black robes rustled softly as he moved. When he was fully standing, he looked directly at Grace with an expression that was completely different from the angry look he had worn just minutes before. "Nurse Williams," Judge Thompson said, and his voice was no longer stern or harsh. Instead, it was gentle and filled with respect. "I owe you a sincere and heartfelt apology. I made a quick judgment based purely on your appearance, and I was completely wrong to do so." Grace felt her heart skip a beat. She had not expected an apology, especially not a public one in front of all these people. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. The judge's voice became even warmer as he continued. "Your scrubs do not dishonor this courtroom in any way. In fact, they honor it more than any expensive suit could ever do. You represent the very best of what it means to serve others selflessly." Grace felt tears forming in her eyes, but these were not tears of embarrassment or sadness. They were tears of relief, gratitude, and vindication. She had stood up for herself and for all healthcare workers everywhere, and it had made a difference. "I have spent my entire career making judgments," Judge Thompson continued, looking round the courtroom at all the faces watching him. "Today, I learned an important lesson about the danger of judging too quickly before hearing the full story. Thank you for your service to our community, Nurse Williams. And thank you for teaching me and everyone in this courtroom about true dignity and what real service looks like." For a moment, the courtroom remained silent. Then, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman in the front row who had been thinking about her own experience with a kind nurse, began to clap her hands together. The sound echoed softly through the large room. The businessman, Mr. Johnson, who had been shaking his head disapprovingly earlier, looked at Mrs. Patterson and felt moved by her gesture. He began clapping too, his applause joining hers. Then the young mother sitting near the back started clapping. She was thinking about the nurses who had helped her when her own children were born, and how grateful she had been for their care and kindness, one by one. Other people in the courtroom began to join in. The teacher, the retired man, the office worker, the shop owner, all of them started applauding Grace. The sound grew louder and more enthusiastic as more people participated. Soon, the entire courtroom was filled with the sound of clapping. People were not just clapping politely. They were applauding with real enthusiasm and respect. Some people were even standing up from their seats as they clapped. Showing even greater respect for Grace and what she represented, Grace stood in the middle of all this applause, tears streaming down her face. But she was smiling the biggest smile of her life. She had never expected anything like this when she woke up that morning. She had simply wanted to do her civic duty, just like she did her job every day, quietly, without expecting recognition or praise. Judge Thompson was clapping too, his hands coming together in slow, respectful applause. He had never seen anything quite like this in his courtroom before, and he realized that this was a moment that would stay with him for the rest of his career. Nurse Williams. Judge Thompson said when the applause finally began to quiet down, "You are excused from jury service today. Please return to your important work at the hospital, where I know you're needed and appreciated." As Grace began to walk toward the courtroom door, something wonderful happened. People reached out to shake her hand as she passed by their seats. They smiled at her and whispered words of thanks and encouragement. "Thank you for everything you do," said Mrs. Patterson, grasping Grace's hand warmly. "My mother was a nurse," said Mr. Johnson. "She would have been proud of you today." Grace shook hands with person after person, each one expressing their gratitude not just for her words in the courtroom, but for her service as a health care worker. As Grace walked back to Manchester General Hospital, her head held high and her heart full of joy, she knew that she had made a difference that would last far beyond this single day. Grace Williams rubbed her tired eyes as she walked down the long hospital corridor. The fluorescent lights above buzzed softly, casting a pale glow on the white walls. She had been working at Manchester General Hospital for 12 years now, and every single day still felt meaningful to her. Even when her feet hurt and her back ached, Grace never regretted becoming a nurse. It was Tuesday morning, and Grace had just finished the longest shift of a week. She had been working since yesterday evening, helping patients through the night when the hospital was quieter but no less busy. Her blue scrubs were wrinkled from all the moving round she had done, but they were still clean. Grace always made sure to keep her uniform neat, even during the busiest nights. The night had been particularly challenging. At around midnight, Grace had helped Dr. Miller deliver a baby boy to a young couple who had been trying to have children for years. The joy on their faces when they first held their son made all of Grace's tiredness disappear for a moment. She had cleaned the baby gently and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in his mother's arms. Later, round 3 in the morning, Grace had spent 2 hours caring for an elderly man named Mr. Peterson who had pneumonia. He was scared and alone because his family lived far away. Grace sat with him, holding his hand and talking to him softly until he fell asleep. She checked on him every hour to make sure he was breathing well and comfortable. The most difficult part of the night happened just before dawn. A young woman named Lisa had been brought in after a terrible car accident. She was badly hurt and needed immediate help. Grace worked alongside Dr. Adams and other nurses to stabilize Lisa's condition. They worked for hours, checking her vital signs, giving her medicine, and making sure she was safe. By the time the sun started to rise, Lisa was stable and would recover fully. Now, as Grace walked toward the hospital exit, she felt that familiar mix of exhaustion and satisfaction that came after helping people. Her shift was finally over, and all she wanted was to go home, take a hot shower, and sleep for a few hours. But as Grace reached the hospital's main entrance, she suddenly remembered something very important. 3 weeks ago, she had received an official letter in the mail. It was a jury duty summons, asking her to appear at the courthouse today at 10 in the morning. Grace looked at the large clock on the hospital wall. It was already 9-30. Grace felt her heart skip a beat. She had completely forgotten about jury duty because she had been so focused on her work. She looked down at her blue scrubs, which were comfortable and practical, but definitely not formal court attire. The scrubs had small wrinkles from her long night shift, though they were still clean and professional looking. Grace thought about her options quickly. She could go home first, change into nicer clothes, and then go to court. But that would take at least 45 minutes, and she would be very late. Grace had never been late for anything important in her life, and she did not want to start now. She believed deeply that serving on a jury was just as important as serving patients. Both were ways to help her community and make a difference in people's lives. The justice system needed good people to participate. Just like the healthcare system needed dedicated nurses, Grace made her decision. She would go straight to the courthouse in her scrubs. They were clean, professional, and represented honest work. She grabbed her small purse from her locker and walked quickly out of the hospital. The courthouse was only a 15-minute walk from the hospital. Grace walked fast, her comfortable nursing shoes clicking on the sidewalk. She passed people in business suits heading to work, parents taking their children to school, and shop owners opening their stores for the day. When Grace reached the courthouse, she looked up at the impressive stone building. It was much bigger than she had expected, with tall columns and wide steps leading to the entrance. She had never been inside a courthouse before, and she felt nervous. Grace climbed the steps slowly, her heart beating faster with each step. The building felt serious and important inside. The hallways were quiet and formal. People spoke in whispers, and everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going. Grace found the directory and located the correct courtroom. She walked down a long hallway, her footsteps echoing softly. When she reached the right door, she paused and took a deep breath. She could hear voices inside, the judge, lawyers, and other people who had come for jury duty. Grace straightened her shoulders, checked that her scrubs looked neat, and slowly opened the heavy wooden door. Grace pushed open the heavy courtroom door as quietly as she could. The door made a soft creaking sound that seemed very loud in the silent room. She stepped inside and immediately felt the weight of the formal atmosphere around her. The courtroom was larger than Grace had imagined. High ceilings stretched above her, and tall windows let in streams of morning sunlight. Wooden benches filled the room in neat rows, just like pews in a church. The walls were painted in serious colors, deep browns and muted greens that made everything feel important and official. Grace looked round and saw about 30 people already seated, all potential jurors like herself. She noticed immediately that everyone was dressed very formally. The men wore dark suits with pressed shirts and colorful ties. The women wore elegant dresses, blazers, and dress shoes. Some people had briefcases or nice handbags sitting beside them. Grace felt a small knot form in her stomach as she compared her blue scrubs to everyone else's clothing. Her nursing uniform suddenly seemed very casual and out of place in this formal setting. But she reminded herself that she had come straight from helping people, and there was nothing wrong with honest work clothes. She found an empty seat in the third row and sat down carefully, trying not to make any noise. The wooden bench was hard and uncomfortable, very different from the soft chairs in the hospital break room. Grace folded her hands in her lap and tried to blend in with the other potential jurors. At the front of the courtroom sat Judge Robert Thompson behind a large wooden desk that was raised higher than everything else in the room. He was an older man, probably in his early 60s, with perfectly combed grey hair and sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His black judicial robes made him look very official and important. Judge Thompson had been working in this courthouse for 25 years. He was known throughout the legal community for running his courtroom with strict rules and high standards. Lawyers who appeared before him always dressed their best and spoke very formally. He expected the same level of respect from everyone who entered his courtroom. The judge was talking quietly with two lawyers who stood near his desk. One was a woman in a navy blue suit, and the other was a man in a charcoal gray suit. They were discussing something about the case they would be hearing today. Grace tried to listen, but their voices were too low for her to understand. As Judge Thompson lifted his head to address the potential jurors, his eyes swept across the room. He was about to welcome everyone and begin the jury selection process when something caught his attention. In the third row, a woman in bright blue medical scrubs sat among all the formally dressed people. The judge's expression changed immediately. His eyebrows came together in a frown, and his mouth became a thin, straight line. He stopped talking to the lawyers and stared directly at Grace, the friendly, professional atmosphere in the room suddenly felt cold and tense. "Excuse me, Judge," Thompson said in a voice that was much louder than necessary. His words echoed off the high ceiling. "Young lady in the blue uniform." Grace felt her heart jump. She looked round quickly, hoping he might be talking to someone else. But she knew he meant her. Every person in the courtroom turned to look at her. She felt her face become hot with embarrassment. "This is a court of law, not a hospital," the judge continued, his voice stern and disapproving. "Your clothing shows complete disrespect for these important proceedings." The courtroom became so quiet that Grace could hear her own heartbeat. She felt as if everyone was judging her, just like the judge was. Some people were whispering to each other behind their hands. Others were shaking their heads, as if they agreed that Grace had done something wrong. "Stand up," Judge Thompson commanded. "Do you think this is appropriate attire for a courtroom? This is a place where we decide important matters of justice, not a place for casual dress." Grace stood up slowly, her legs feeling weak beneath her. She was a confident person at work, always calm during medical emergencies. But now she felt very small and embarrassed. She had never been scolded in public before, especially not in front of so many strangers. The judge's words cut deep into Grace's heart. She had come straight from saving lives, from helping a new mother, from comforting a scared elderly man, from working alongside doctors to help an injured woman. Now she was being treated as if she had done something terrible. But even though she felt humiliated, Grace kept her head high. She knew in her heart that she had done nothing wrong. She had simply tried to fulfill her civic duty, just like everyone else in the room. Her scrubs represented hard work and dedication, not disrespect. Grace waited silently for the judge to finish speaking, her dignity intact despite the public embarrassment. Use a warm, empathetic tone.